Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Devon, Vice President of Entrepreneurship and Business Development at the National Urban League. On behalf of our President and CEO, Mark H. Morial, I'd like to welcome you to the U.S. Small Business Administration briefing on Restaurant Revitalization Fund. We're honored to have the SBA Administrator, Isabella Guzman, as well as the Special Assistant, to talk more about the details of the program and to tell you how you can apply. We'll hear from them in just a few minutes, but right now, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Donald R. Cravens, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the National Urban League, to introduce the administrator. Don?
Thanks for that introduction, Stephanie. As Stephanie mentioned, I'm so proud to rejoin the National Urban League as its Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. As we know, many Black and minority-owned food and drink establishments have been severely and negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the National Urban League is committed to helping mitigate the disproportionate effects of this downturn on minority-owned businesses. We are pleased to partner with the U.S. Small Business Administration to host this webinar and to share the details about the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, established to provide funding to help businesses stabilize and keep their operations open. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce today and welcome the administrator of the Small Business Administration, Ms. Isabella Guzman. She serves as the voice for America's 30 million small businesses and innovative startups. Administrator Guzman grew up in a small business family and has been an entrepreneur herself. She has spent her entire career advising entrepreneurs, launching ventures, helping small businesses navigate government, and creating policies and programs to help advance entrepreneurship and innovation. Most recently, she served as the director of the California Office of Small Business Advocate, where she helped small businesses and innovative startups in the world's 5th largest economy. She advocated fiercely for financial relief for small businesses and focused on expanding assistance to entrepreneurs in underserved communities. In addition, she served as the Economic Recovery Support Function Coordinator for the state, where she spearheaded the small business recovery effort during the COVID-19 pandemic. I've done some asking around about Administrator Guzman, and a trusted friend described her in 2 ways: extremely competent and willing to listen. I can think of no better attributes, Administrator, in these trying times. I proudly present to you Administrator Isabella Guzman.
Thank you, Don, for that very kind introduction. I'm gonna have to find out who your source was and thank them. And thank you, Stephanie, so much, and for all the work that you guys have been doing to help support businesses during this time. Mark Morial and I connected recently to share our commitment to partnering and to support businesses owned by people of color. And I'm so glad that we have the chance to put that into practice right away by working together today. More to come, for sure, as the National Urban League is such a crucial partner in our efforts to work toward equity, which is, of course, the Biden-Harris priority, and lift up our diverse small business owners. So thank you for the work that you do to fight for economic empowerment, equality, and social justice for all people. The COVID pandemic has been especially devastating for Black-owned businesses. We heard the early estimates that 40% of Black-owned businesses were shutting their doors at the beginning of the pandemic and economic downturn. Black-owned business restaurants and other food and beverage businesses have been particularly hard hit as well as the whole industry. And our food businesses were among the first to close and likely will be the last to fully reopen to recapture those revenues. Yet Black small business owners, particularly Black women, are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs, and that entrepreneurial spirit needs to be supported, and especially here at the SBA. And we know that it is so strong, that spirit is very strong within the Black community, and so it's our job at SBA to give those entrepreneurs the support and resources that they need to recover and rebuild from this pandemic, and then on an ongoing basis to start and grow and be resilient. So my message to all the diverse food and beverage businesses listening today, all those Black-owned firms, is that help customized for you is here. And that's thanks to the American Rescue Plan passed by Congress and signed into law by President Biden. We are starting with giving out $28.6 billion in targeted relief through grants, not loans, to restaurants and other food and beverage businesses who have been impacted by COVID, as demonstrated in their financials. We know that the impact is there. In the grant application, we've been focused on trying to deliver this quickly, from the signing last month to now our portal opening on Monday and registration beginning tomorrow. Across all of our programs and policies, though, I want to make sure that SBA is as entrepreneurial as the businesses that we serve, just like all of you who have had to adapt to consumer needs and pivot all year long to serve your clients and survive in the marketplace. So we've designed the application and the process for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, or RRF, with restaurants and food and beverage businesses, the end users, in mind, paying particular attention to the reality that you faced over the past year and how you've been running your businesses in this new COVID marketplace. And my incredible SBA team will walk you through all the great features of the program in a few minutes. So I'll just share a couple of them with you briefly to give you a sense of how we are adapting to serve our small business customers in improved, innovative ways, and how we're going to set that as the stage for looking at all of our programs and services to let you know that SBA is here to help on an ongoing basis. So for this program in particular, we looked at how businesses were having to incur expenses. So we've defined eligible use of funds broadly. So you can deduct a range of expenses from rent, supplies, and business debt as well, among others. And we've extended the time period through March 2023 to use these funds, giving you the most flexibility that we can in your business. And we've also designed the program to be tech smart. It has walk me through type assistance that you can hover over the questions and get guidance as you go. As well, you can call us because we have set up a 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time customer service line to give you help. And we think we're estimating that the whole process should take you about 25 minutes based on the testing that we've been doing. We know that so many businesses have adopted technology at high rates during the pandemic. And so we are integrating technology partners as well from the ecosystem to increase the way that you can access this program. So in addition to offering our direct application at SBA.gov, we're also partnering with the point of sale vendors to help you apply or get connected to the SBA portal, which, where you're already doing business with those partners, POS vendors like Clover and Aloha and Square and Toast, and we'll be adding more partners as we go. We've also focused on eliminating bureaucratic requirements that just didn't make sense for your industry, trying to simplify the process and help you navigate government through a more easy to use front application. And we know above all that our smallest, as well as our underserved businesses, especially those owned by people of color, have suffered the most from the pandemic. And yet many have been unable to access the relief that's been out there. And so Congress acted and understood this when they included language in the American Rescue Plan that mandated a 21-day priority period for restaurants, food and beverage businesses owned by women, veterans, and socially or economically disadvantaged people. And as Black-owned businesses, that means that you will be given priority access to these funds from May 3rd, when it opens next Monday, to May 24th. And since this is a first come, first served program, it's important that you put your application in as soon as possible. Congress also allocated money for the smalls. That $5 billion was initially set aside, targeted towards smaller businesses. And we added another $4.5 billion for a total of $9.5 billion in various set-asides for smaller firms. Congress also directed us to ensure a broad range of restaurants and food and beverage businesses are eligible for the fund. So of course restaurants, but in addition, food trucks and food carts and caterers, and as well as breweries and tap rooms and many more, they're all included. So our focus is really on trying to help as many as possible impacted by COVID-19. And all of this is in line with the Biden-Harris administration's emphasis on equity, which is a vision that I'm committed to at the SBA as well. We know that all of our small businesses must be supported and given opportunities to succeed if our nation is going to thrive. It's imperative for our global competitiveness that we support all of our small businesses. And we know it's not just the design, but also the implementation and the outreach, which is why today's event is so important and why we are prioritizing accessibility. The fund's online application portal will hopefully be easy for you to use, so we encourage you to access it, access our customer service as needed. It's open now. and across the board, just know that we're committed to bringing this customer first approach, as well as technology and equity, to all of our programs at the SBA, so that we can help businesses recover, start, grow, and be resilient, as I said. So just know that the SBA has offerings to fit your business needs and beyond the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and that we're here to make sure that that access is fair. We know that this pandemic will end one day soon, and thanks to the American Rescue Plan, as well as the Biden-Harris administration's Shots in Arms campaign and the dedication of the frontline workers in the healthcare sector, half of all adults in the US have received at least one dose of the vaccine. That's important to getting our marketplace back to normal. We know that you want to reopen fully and safely. At the SBA, we're committed to making that happen. We're here to help you get back on your feet and ensure that our restaurants and local food and beverage establishments can survive this pandemic and beyond. So thanks again to the National Urban League for pulling all of this together, and thank you all for joining us, as well as supporting your communities and our nation's economy. I'm going to turn it back over to Stephanie Devane. Thank you so much for your leadership as the Vice President of the Urban League on Entrepreneurship and Business Development. We look forward to partnering with you. And I know that our Capital Access team is here to walk you through all the specifics, but just know that we want you to get ready to apply. We want you to be first in to get these funds. So thank you so much for your time. Keep up hope. We're here to help.
Thank you so much, Administrator Guzman, for your passion for entrepreneurs, and especially for all of the hard work that you and your team have been engaged in and done to make these critical funds available to businesses, especially in underserved communities that need it so desperately. It's just a testament to your leadership that you're making these funds both available and accessible for Black-owned businesses. And we want to say that your commitment to ensuring that all small businesses, especially those in our underserved communities, have access to the resources and the opportunities that they need to strengthen and grow their businesses. So thank you again for being here. And now I'd like to introduce Nicola Montaigne, who is the special assistant, and she will walk you through the details of the program, as well as how you can apply for funding for the Revitalization Fund. Nicola?
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Administrator and Don. I'm so excited to be here today and get to dive into the details on this program with you all, and hopefully give you the information that you need to feel prepared and ready for our application launch on Monday. So I will go into it starting with the basics. The American Rescue Plan Act became law on March 11th, 2021, and thus gave us the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, including $28.6 billion for SBA to award funds. And the appropriations will remain available until they're expended. We do want to acknowledge that we do recognize that $28.6 billion might not be enough to satisfy the demand and the relief needed in this industry. And so we acknowledge that, and we hear you, and we're going to do our best to adequately describe that need and that demand to Congress, and hopefully get more funds for this program. So the funds must be used for eligible expenses no later than March 2023. The administrator spoke to this in her remarks. We wanted to give you the full runway to be able to get back on your feet and get your business back to the place that it was before the pandemic, hopefully, or even better than that. So wanted to give a really long runway to use those funds. So let's go into who is eligible for this program. So eligible entities are businesses who are not permanently closed, and the primary purpose is to serve the public food and drink. That's kind of the guiding principles. It is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, so it includes restaurants, but it also includes food stands, food trucks, food carts, caterers, bars, saloons, taverns, snack and non-alcoholic beverage bars. So that could be a coffee shop or an ice cream shop. And then we have some enumerated entities that are also eligible, but we'll just have to provide a little bit more documentation, and that includes bakeries, brew pubs, breweries, wineries, distilleries, tap rooms. So for these entities, you're eligible just as long as you had at least 33% of your 2019 gross receipts in on-site sales to the public. And you'll provide this documentation in the application process. And then additionally, INs are eligible if they can also demonstrate that 33% of 2019 gross receipts in on-site sales of food and beverage to the public. So those are just some enumerated entities. You might also fall into this other category, other similar places of businesses in which the public or patrons assemble for the primary purpose of being served food or drink. So maybe you're a bowling alley, but you can prove that you have greater than 33% gross receipts in food and beverage. And so in that case, you could be eligible here. So going from who is eligible to kind of quantifying who is not eligible. Entities are not eligible if they are a state or local government operated business, if they have a pending or approved application for the Shuttered Venues operator grant, which went live this week. A publicly traded company are not eligible. Permanently closed entities are not eligible. Nonprofit entities are not eligible. And if you're not eligible for funding of at least $1,000, you are not eligible for this program. And then the big one, I skipped it on the slides, but I wanted to really highlight it at the end. As of March 13th, 2020, any entity that owns or operates with its affiliates more than 20 locations, regardless of whether you do business under the same name or different names, or if those locations are in different non-eligible entity types, you are not eligible for this program. So 20 locations or less is the guiding principle for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. How much am I eligible for? So SBA can provide funding up to $5 million per location and up to $10 million for the applicant and any affiliated businesses. So if you have 20 locations that you are affiliated with, the maximum amount you can receive is $10 million. And the minimum award is $1,000. How does this program differ from other SBA programs? So as Administrator Guzman mentioned, we wanted to eliminate some of the hurdles that could exist in other programs. So you do not need to be in SAM.gov to be eligible for this program. And SBA will not require a DUNS or CAGE identifier for this program. So you don't have to worry about registering in any of those places. You will just register at the SBA site. Additionally, valid unexpired ITINs are acceptable for this program. Who is eligible for forms of organization? So when you get to the application, you will select which form of organization that you are, and those include C corporations, S corporations, partnerships, limited liability companies, sole proprietors, self-employed individuals, independent contractors, tribal businesses, and LLCs taxed as C corporations or S corporations or sole proprietors. B corporations are eligible. They will just select either C Corp or S Corp based on how they are taxed. Franchises. So franchises are eligible for this program as long as they satisfy all other eligibility criteria and they are listed on the SBA franchise directory. And so inside the application portal itself, you will be able to see the list of franchises on the SBA directory. You'll be able to select if you are on it. If you are not on it, you must submit the franchisor disclosure document and any other documentation to franchise@sba.gov for review to make sure you are eligible for this program. On bankruptcy, so applicants that are operating under an approved plan of reorganization under either a Chapter 11, 12, or 13 bankruptcy and meet all program requirements are eligible for this funding. They are not eligible if you are permanently closed, if you filed a Chapter 7 liquidation bankruptcy, or if you filed a Chapter 7, 11, 12, and 13 bankruptcy, but are not under an approved plan of reorganization. And just to provide some clarity on permanently closed, we know a lot of your businesses had to close temporarily to abide by local restrictions or state restrictions during the pandemic, or maybe it just didn't make sense for you to try to stay open given the regulations in your locality or state. And so we think of that as temporarily closed. You reopened your doors, or you're going to reopen your doors when those restrictions are lifted. And so you do not count as permanently closed, and you would still be eligible for this program. Affiliation. So we get a lot of questions on this, so I want to make sure I spend a good amount of time here. You must count all your locations owned or operating under your applicant's business EIN and your applicant business's affiliates, even those that are not eligible for RRF. So, and as I mentioned earlier, any entity who owns or operates more than 20 locations with its affiliates, regardless of name or industry, is not eligible for this program. So the example of that would be if you own 16 dry cleaners and 5 restaurants, you would be at 21 locations, you're not eligible for this program. Another example could be if you are owned by a management company who manages or owns over 20 restaurants, then you are not eligible for this program. Continued here, a lot of information on corporate groups. So we understand that in this industry, there's layers to ownership, and we want to acknowledge that and be clear on our guidance. Locations owned or operated by a single corporate group, as I mentioned, are going to count toward that 20 location max and the 10 million grant max. And so if you're part of that corporate group that owns or operates more than 20 locations, you're not eligible for these funds. This includes any locations that operate under separate tax identification numbers or names, and it applies whether or not ownership or control is through an individual, a management or holding company, or other entities. So when you're filling out your application, you'll be going through the portal on Monday. It'll be 12:10. You're ticking through, and when you're asked about your affiliates, this is the most concise way that we're trying to describe it. So you must select yes and list your affiliates if any of the following apply. If the RRF eligible applicant entity has an equity interest or right to profit of 50% or greater of one or more other business entities, you select yes, I have affiliates, and you list those. You must select yes if any individual owner of 20% or greater equity interest of the eligible entity of the applicant. If any owner who has 20% or more has ownership of over 50% in any other entities, you must list those entities, and those are counted towards your location and your affiliates. You must also select yes if the applicant business is a holding company or management company that owns or manages a business other than the applicant business, or if the entity is owned or operated by a management or holding company that operates other entities. So we know this can be a weighted topic. Try to provide as much clarity here as possible. And we also have, I'll walk through in a little bit, some support resources where we have all this information posted to hopefully you can follow up with if you have more questions. How do other SBA programs impact RRF? So PPP is the biggest one. Any funds that you receive through the Paycheck Protection Program will be backed out of the applicant's final funding amount. So we verify using your your tax identification number, your EIN, your ITIN, or your SSN that's associated with your PPP loans, and we'll subtract those out. We really recommend if you to apply for this program the same way you received your PPP loans. We do acknowledge that if you applied for a first draw PPP loan for multiple locations under one EIN, and then maybe your second draw, you applied for PPP loans under different EINs, that could demonstrate that 25% loss threshold in the PPP program. You will have to provide all of the EINs that are associated with the applicant, and we'll have a place for you to do that on the application. So in the application, it'll say, this is the number for my first draw, this is the number for my second draw, and then if you did have those second draws under different EINs, there'll be a supplemental place to enter any other relevant EINs related to PPP loans that would impact that entity. Upon applying for RRF, applicants should withdraw any outstanding PPP applications. So we've gotten some questions saying, I submitted an application for PPP. I haven't heard yet if I'm approved. I haven't gotten funding. What should I do? And in this case, you should withdraw that application if you intend to apply for RRF, because the PPP loan amount is in the calculation number, you cannot receive PPP funds after you receive or apply for the restaurant fund. And then additionally, as I mentioned before, applicants must not have a pending application for or received a shuttered venues operator grant. Other attestations by the applicant. So in the portal, you'll be asked to certify that the current economic uncertainty makes the funding request necessary to support ongoing or anticipated operations. And to be clear, we fully believe that all entities applying for this program can attest and certify to this. You've had to endure the pandemic and all of the struggles and the devastation as a result, and so that is the economic uncertainty that makes this funding necessary for you all. So you should not be worried about having to certify to this. Okay, eligible uses of funds. So we split up our funding and uses into 3 categories to try to kind of identify what we're covering here. So for business expenses, it includes payroll costs, it includes utility payments, maintenance expenses, business supplies, that could include protective gear, masks, gloves, or cleaning supplies that you had to take on to accommodate the pandemic. Business food and beverage expenses, so hops if you make beer in your brewery, or other raw materials are included in that. Covered supplier costs, and then business operating expenses, so insurance, marketing, legal fees, your point of sale servicing fees could all be included in this. The construction expenses that are eligible for this program include outdoor seating. So you expanded your patio to build out your outdoor seating to accommodate dining restrictions in your area, or you built your sidewalk out to have outdoor seating. Expansion costs are not eligible, and that would mean if you haven't opened yet, your build costs are not eligible here. So you can't build a new location or build out a new room in your restaurant. Those expenses are not eligible for this program. Business debt. So this is one use of funds that we're really excited to share with you all. The administrator alluded to it in her remarks as well. These funds, unlike some of the other COVID relief programs, you can use these funds on business debt. So you can pay business mortgage obligations or other business debt service. This includes both principal and interest. It does not include prepayments of principal or interest, so you can't pay off your EIDL loan ahead of time, but you can pay regularly scheduled payments. And you could also, if you have these regularly scheduled payments going out for the next year on your EIDL loan or whatever term it may be, you could use the money for all of those payments and just make sure you have it set aside to do that. So this includes any SBA debt that you have, your 7A loans, your EIDL loans, as I mentioned. So this is a really expansive list. We hope for you all to use these funds, and you can use them. The time period is between February 15th, 2020 and March 11th, 2023. So any expenses that you incurred after February 15th, 2020, you can, if they're past due, you can make those current if you incurred them during that time. And then you have a really long runway out to March 2023 to use these funds. If you do permanently close before March 2023, the covered period ends on whichever comes sooner. So it would just end on that date that you permanently closed. And any funds that you didn't spend on eligible expenses by the time the covered period ends must be returned to the government. When do I have to use the funds? Some details on what we're going to ask you about how you use the funds. So we're going to ask you to complete a use of funds assessment. It'll be a very simplified form to provide us some details on what you use the money on. So you would document, we'll give you the list of eligible expenses. You would document, I used $5,000 on business maintenance expenses for math. I used $10,000 to construct some outdoor seating, etc. And you'll just be asked to certify that that information is true and correct. And that'll be your use of funds assessment. So that will be when you fully utilize your funds. Until then, until you fill out that form, if December 2021 or December 2022 comes before that time, you will also be asked to submit some other use of funds data. It's unaudited. It'll be the same type of questions, just unaudited, no certification there, to provide annual assessment of how we're using those funds. And that will only be on an annual basis until you complete your use of funds assessment. So if you finish using your funds in November 2021, you won't have to come back in December and satisfy this reporting. We'll provide some additional details on this reporting, and we'll make it very clear to recipients when and where they need to be and what information that they need to have. Okay, getting to the good stuff, how I can actually calculate and figure out how much money I can get from this program. So calculation 1 is the most simple calculation. It is for businesses. If you opened before 2019, calculation 1 is for you. You will take your 2019 gross receipts, you will subtract your 2020 gross receipts, and subtract your PPP loan amounts. So the goal here is really this fund is meant to kind of replace those revenues that you lost due to the pandemic in 2020, and that is what this formula is really driving at. So this is a simplified formula, calculation 1, if you open prior to 2019. If you open during 2019, you will take your average 2019 monthly gross receipts, times that by 12 to get an annualized number, and then you will subtract your 2020 gross receipts, and then you will subtract your PPP loan amounts. So if you opened on July 1st, 2019, you'll take your 6 months of gross receipts for that year, divide it by 6, multiply it by 12, then you'll have your annualized 2019 gross receipts as your base. Then you subtract your 2020 gross receipts and your PPP loans. If you did open partially through 2019, you may choose to use calculation 3. So that's at your own discretion. And this is really meant, I heard some feedback from applicants like, perhaps I opened on December 26, 2019. I really don't think those days at the end of 2019 are reflective of my actual sales number because I did a soft opening and there wasn't much foot traffic, etc. So you could in that case choose to use calculation 3, which we'll go into. So calculation 3, applicants that began operations on or between January 1st, 2020 and March 10th, 2021, or applicants who might not have opened yet, but you incurred eligible expenses as of March 11th, 2021. So if you haven't opened your doors yet, but you started spending money on those eligible expenses, such as business operating expenses or your outdoor seating between February 15th, 2020 and March 11th, 2021, then you can use this formula. If you opened between sometime in 2020, you can use this formula. If you opened in 2021, then you can use this formula. So your formula is taking the amount you spent on those eligible expenses between February 15th, 2020 and March 11th, 2021. And then you subtract your 2021 or your 2020 gross receipts if you have them. And then you subtract your 2021 gross receipts through March 11th, 2021 to match that time period as the expenses, and then subtract your PPP loan amounts. So this one is definitely the most complicated formula, and you will be asked to provide documentation to support those eligible expenses. But as I mentioned before, if you open partially through 2019, you could also elect to use this formula. Calculation 4. So this one isn't exactly an explicit calculation. It's kind of a hybrid calculation or a combination of the others. So some folks have come to us with an example like, I own 2 restaurants. I opened one of them in 2015 and I opened the other in November of 2019. So that means 2 calculations apply to me. I'm applying for both locations under the same application. What do I do? So in this case, you are able to use calculation 1 for your business that applies to. So for the business that opened in 2015, you use calculation 1. And then for your business that opened in 2019, you can use calculation 2 or 3. And then you just add those fundings together and subtract your PPP loans. And that's your calculation 4. And just an important note here, the aggregated funding amount is limited to the $5 million per location and $10 million for the applicant and affiliate. So it's important to note if you're using that hybrid calculation. Okay, so when we're talking about the formulas, obviously gross receipts are at the core, and want to give you some information about what you can exclude from your gross receipts. You do not need to include in your 2020 gross receipts any Paycheck Protection Program loans. So don't include your PPP loan amounts because we take those out later. Do not include your SBA Section 1112 payments. So if you got that debt relief in 2020, you don't need to include that as gross receipts. SBA EIDL loans, EIDL advance, targeted EIDL advance, or any other grants received via the CARES Act, you do not need to include in your gross receipts number. Any state and local business grants, you do not need to include in your gross receipts number. And this one's specific to some specific entities. It's the Randolph-Shepard Act financial relief and restoration payments. You won't need to include those numbers in your gross receipts either. Okay, how do you apply? So how can you actually put all of this information and prep to work? You can apply directly through SBA at restaurants.sba.gov. And as Administrator Guzman outlined at the beginning, you can actually register for your account tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern time at restaurants.sba.gov. And that just means signing up with your email, your password, getting that all set up, your 2-factor authentication, so you're ready to go when the portal opens on Monday with the application. So you'll go in there, you'll register. You won't actually be able to start the application yet, but you will have that peace of mind that I'm ready for Monday. You can do that anytime throughout the weekend. So while we are urging you to apply as soon as the portal opens, the registration isn't as urgent. You can do that throughout the weekend. You could do a Saturday. If you're on the West Coast and 9 a.m. is too early, you can do that later in the afternoon. But the portal does open, as Administrator said, on Monday, May 3rd at noon Eastern, and we urge you all to apply as soon as you can. So go to our resources site, which is sba.gov/restaurants. You can print out the sample application and have your answers all ready so that you can just pop them in when you're applying. You can access our knowledge management base, which is basically like a live Q&A database of all these different questions that we've received at our call center or in our emails or on webinars like these. And you can read through those, find any questions that you need answered to prepare. Or you can call our call center and you can ask your questions there in the lead up to the application launch. And that's at 844-279-8898. Additionally, if you use Toast or Square, you can apply through those vendors. So if you use Toast, if you're a current customer of Toast and Square, you'll be able to apply directly through them. It'll be in the site that you're comfortable with. They'll have your gross receipts data and documentation for you. And so if you have any questions about actually how to access that point of sale application with Toast or Square, you can reach out to them and they'll direct you to that. And then additionally, you can apply telephonically at 844-279-8898. We do urge you, we know that, and why we have this option is because, not everyone has access to the internet, and we completely understand that, so we wanted to provide this option. We do, however, want to urge you, if you can get access to the internet, maybe you have to drive a couple hours, we strongly recommend you consider this because the telephonic applications will have a little bit longer processing times, given that we have to mail the application to you to get an authentication, a signature, and a notary to make sure that we have all the fraud mitigation steps in place. So if you can get access to the internet, we really, really urge you to do that, but you can call this number and apply telephonically if not. Okay, what documents can you gather to prepare to apply, and what will you need to submit at the portal itself? So first, the application, we'll give you that. That's at SBA or restaurants.sba.gov. So you don't need to bring a PDF or upload a pre-filled PDF or anything like that. So the application, check, you get that at restaurants.sba.gov. Verification for tax information. So we'll be verifying applicants' taxes using the 4506T and all that information. That will be provided to you directly in the portal as well. So you'll proceed through the application, and when you're close to the end, it'll send you a DocuSign package that you'll have to execute, and included in that package is this 4506T. So you don't need to complete that ahead of time and have that PDF saved anywhere. Gross receipts documentation. So since the calculations are based on gross receipts and eligible expenses, we'll just need some documentation to verify that the numbers that you provide are correct. And that includes tax returns. It includes bank statements, which will validate your bank account. And it could include externally or internally prepared financial statements or point of sale reports, as I referenced earlier. And to get into the specifics for each calculation, what is required, so the application and 4506T we talked about. For 2019, it is required that you supply your tax returns and your most recent 3 months of bank statements. We do know that maybe you don't have your April bank statement ready yet, so that could be January, February, March as well. 2020 gross receipts. So if you're using calculation 1 or 2, you'll have to demonstrate your 2020 gross receipts. And the documentation that we prefer or that will help SBA make an easier review is your tax returns. Now we know not everyone has filed their 2020 tax returns. You probably asked for an extension or you haven't filed those yet. So we also prefer point of sale reports, and we have partnerships with, in addition to Toast and Square, who you can apply directly through, Clover, Aloha, and we'll announce some more in the coming days, where they'll provide you with a package of documentation that you can use especially for this application, but you can really upload any point of sale report that will validate that gross receipt number. So maybe it's not Aloha, Square, Toast, or Clover. Maybe you use Upserve or Revel or some other company, and you can upload a documentation or a report from them that validates your gross receipts number. We also will accept externally or internally prepared financial statements, such as income statements or P&Ls, signed, dated, and certified as to the accuracy by the applicant. These will take a little bit longer to review for SBA, just because if you're internally preparing them, we need to look closely and make sure everything's correct. But we definitely accept those, and so you can submit those for your gross receipt documentation. Calculation 3. So since calculation 3 is a little bit different and we use eligible expenses as a piece in the calculation, you'll have to provide documentation for that as well. So similar to calculation 1 and 2, your 3 most recent months of bank statements, your 45060, which is included in the application, and then you have to provide 2020 and 2021 gross receipts documentation. If you have your 2020 tax return, that's great. If you don't, you can upload 2020 point of sale reports. You can upload 2021 point of sale reports, and those are preferred. You can also upload those externally or internally prepared financial statements to demonstrate your 2020 and your 2021 gross receipts. But then you also must supply some documentation validating your eligible expense number. So what we prefer, if you have access or have the ability to get any qualified third-party accountant, bookkeeper, or your CPA to provide a comfort letter with the associated financial statements, that helps us speed up our review and we'll add another layer of validation. Totally understand that you might not have access to that. In that case, you can still upload your externally or internally prepared financial statements documenting those expenses between February 15th, 2020 and March 11th, 2021. And then you could also supply any and all expense documentation. So if you have payroll documentation, your outdoor seating invoices, your leases, etc. And then back to those entities I called out earlier, where you'd have to upload some supplemental documentation showing you did 33% of your sales in on-site sales to the public. So some suggestions we have for that documentation include Tax and Trade Bureau forms, state or local sales tax forms that you filed, or internally created reports from your inventory management or accounting systems. How can you get help and ask all the questions that might be popping up throughout this presentation? So we try to be thorough, but we know that there are so many different questions and so many different circumstances that you all might be facing, and we want to be able to address those. So we've set up this dedicated call center at 844-279-8898, and that can be your best friend. It's open 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday to Friday Eastern time. And if you call when it's closed, we'll give you a call back and follow up on your question, or you can access that knowledge management base that's in the How to Get Help Applying section of sba.gov/restaurants. So call the call center. They have a lot of questions available with answers there already, and we'll be able to help service you. And we also have English, we have Spanish, and then we have the ability to translate in over 30 languages. So we're really hoping to reach everyone with the support that they need. Best practices. So now you have all the information you need. What can I do to make sure that I have my best foot forward, the best possible application? So first, provide complete documentation. So applications with incomplete documentation will be rejected, and will have to go back and upload and ask for complete documentation and re-review that. So we really urge you to use your resources, use the information in these slides, prepare your documentation, and upload the complete documentation that shows every piece of your calculation the first time that you apply. Second, if you have resources, leverage them. You have the use of CPAs, you can get that comfort letter, as I mentioned. They can help ensure a complete and well-documented application, and leverage the SBA's resources. Leverage the call center, leverage that knowledge management base, and really prepare to apply day 1, hour 1 at noon on May 3rd. Application corrections. So SBA cannot make corrections on behalf of applicants. If you notice corrections that you need to be made, you should call the call center, and we'll work through that with you. But please take the time. You know, I know it's a rush to apply, and I'm urging you to apply quickly, but take the time at the end to, you know, take a breath, make sure everything's correct, and that'll go a long way in ensuring that you don't have any corrections that we need to make. And then if you still intend to apply for PPP, we advise you to quickly complete and get that approved if you can, or withdraw your RRF application, or withdraw your PPP application, because if you have an outstanding PPP application, it will not be approved and you cannot apply for the RRF. When can you apply? So we're conducting a pilot period right now with a very small amount of applicants, just to test the pipes and make sure that everything will work flawlessly, hopefully, for you on Monday. But applications open to the entire public on Monday, May 3rd, if you're an eligible entity, at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And for the first 21 days, while we're accepting all applications, we are prioritizing processing and funding only those from the priority groups. And the priority groups are small business concerns owned by women, veterans, and socially and economically disadvantaged applicants. We really want to reach the most underserved applicants here and really distribute these funds equitably. And so that is why we're really grateful to Congress and to the legislation for outlining this priority period. And we're able to process and fund only those applications for the first 21 days. And then day 22, all eligible applications will start to be processed and funded until funds are exhausted. So diving into those priority groups. A small business concern that is 51% owned and the management and daily business operations of the applicant are controlled by one or more individuals who are women, veterans, and socially and economically disadvantaged. You'll be self-certifying to this on the application. So it's one of the first questions in the application. It's a checkbox that says, I certify that I am at least 51, I'm a small business concern, at least 51% owned. And you check which priority groups. And this is really a mix and match. So perhaps we know in the restaurant industry, there's different ownership structures. Maybe you have 5 owners and each owns 20%. And one owner is a woman and she owns 20%. And another owner is a Black male and he owns 20%. And then another owner is a veteran male and he owns 20%. That's 60%. You're above that 51% threshold, and you can certify to, and you're a small business concern, and you can certify to this priority period. In that case, you would check all 3 boxes, and you would be processed and funded in those first 21 days. So to further dive and just really clarify what these groups are: socially and economically disadvantaged. So socially disadvantaged individuals, those who have been subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice or cultural bias because of their identity as a member of a group without regard to their individual qualities. Those who are presumed socially disadvantaged and presumed economically disadvantaged are this list that I'm about to read. So Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, including Alaskan Natives and Native Hawaiians, and Asian Pacific Americans or subcontinent Asian Americans are all fall into the bucket of socially and economically disadvantaged, and you can certify to that if you are at least 51% or you mix and match based on the criteria I explained. If you are LGBTQ or a disabled American, you are presumed socially disadvantaged. You'll also have to be able to certify to economically disadvantaged, and those are socially disadvantaged individuals whose ability to compete in the free enterprise system has been impaired due to diminished capital and credit opportunities as compared to others in the same business area who are not socially disadvantaged. So those are the details on these groups. And again, it can be a mix and match. Another example could be without that 20% even split. Let's say you have a Hispanic American who owns 40% of the applicant, and then a Native American owns 15%. You're at 55% ownership. You qualify for this priority group if you're a small business concern that is socially disadvantaged and economically disadvantaged. If you are 55% owned by a LGBTQ individual, then as long as you can certify to the economically disadvantaged category as well, then you can certify to this priority group. Entity reorganization for the purpose of qualifying for this period will result in automatic disqualification. So this data will be public, and it is not illegal to certify to this if you are not in these priority groups. So we take it very seriously, and we are really honoring and monitoring this priority period. And finally, so the set-asides that Administrator Guzman spoke about at the beginning of the webinar, we really also want to make sure we're reaching the smallest businesses. And so to that end, we have the set-aside that Congress established, the $5 billion set-aside for applicants with 2019 receipts of not more than 500,000. And then an additional $4 billion set-aside that Administrator Guzman put in place for applicants with 2019 gross receipts from 500,000 to 1.5 million, and also an additional set aside for $500 million for applicants with 2019 receipts of not more than 50,000. So these are really meant to make sure that we're distributing these funds equitably and to those who need them most. I see we have about 4 minutes left, and we had a lot of material. So Stephanie, if you want to let me know if we have time for one question, otherwise we can turn it to you to close this out.
Sure. I think first I want to say thank you to Nicola. That was an incredibly helpful, extremely detailed and well laid out presentation, and it's a lot of information, but you made it really understandable for everyone. So thank you for that. I think we have time for one question, maybe two. So I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to call these FAQs because these are things that most people might want to know. The first one is, I am an owner who has multiple locations that each have their own tax identification numbers, but taxes are filed under the parent company tax ID number. How do I apply?
Great. Okay. So this question, it's a great question. Multiple locations, they each have their own TIN tax identification number. You must apply using the tax identification number for the entity that files taxes. So you must only include gross receipts, or if you're using Table 3, eligible expenses for your locations that are eligible for RRF in this case. So if you file taxes under that parent company, you'd apply under that parent company, and then your gross receipts, you need to make sure that you're only using those for the entities that are eligible for this program.
Great, thank you. The next question is, if approved, how quickly will I get my funds? Something that everyone will likely want to know.
Yes, so we're working as fast as we can and as quickly as we can, because we know, some of you are depending on this relief to hang on and keep your doors open. And so we want to work as quickly as possible to get those funds to you. We can say that we expect it to be on average 14 days, but it could be a little faster than that. And if there is a complicated review or some of those items I mentioned, like incomplete documentation, it might end up taking a little longer, but on average, 2 weeks is about the time that it'll take.
Great, thank you. And I think we have time for one more quick question. So is there an advantage to applying through my POS vendor?
That's a great question, and we've been getting that a lot. And so, as I mentioned, you can apply through Square and Toast if you are a customer with them. And we really think that while it's not an advantage in terms of like those folks will get their money before anyone else or anything like that, we do think it'll provide a benefit to applicants because you might be comfortable with that system already, and they'll have that documentation and those gross receipts numbers that you need for your calculations already in that system. So if you are a customer, we really do urge you to check that out. They've been working really hard to make sure that their customers can apply through their portal. But the SBA portal, I can attest, I've user tested it. It's great as well. And so both are great options for applicants, and both will feel, we've gotten some feedback from those pilot applicants. It takes about 25 minutes, and we've gotten some really great feedback. So I think both will be great options for everyone who's looking to apply.
Fantastic. I want to say thank you again very much to both Nicola and to the administrator for joining us today. That concludes our presentation. We hope you found this useful, and we thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care and be well.